I'm Lance Davis. I'm the CEO of JNF Canada, and I'm really, really delighted that we're able to feature Miri Eisin today. Many of you who've been on our missions to Israel, we say that we do it the JNF way, which means we see things behind, off the beaten track. And one of the things that we offer is on many of our missions is we bring in Miri to be a scholar in residence for the day. And so I've had a chance to see the seam line with Miri, the Syrian border, the Gaza border, and her security insights are frankly invaluable, which is why we wanted her to speak with you about this current situation, the current conflict with Iran. I've never heard her speak about Iran, so I personally am really interested to hear what she has to say. There goes my camera. I'm going to keep my remarks short, but I just want to just say one thought. A number of years ago, while they were building the fence, the border fence, the security fence that surrounds, that protects the Israeli communities on the Gaza border, 20 meters down, high tech, incredible thought went into this. And Miri explained all of the dynamic around it and all of the technology, all of the security thoughts. But I'll never forget that she said, with all of our technology and what's happening with my camera, with all of our know-how, it's ultimately going to be about our people. And as always, we have to count on our people, the IDF and the security forces, the police and whatnot on the ground, because October 7th was evident. We just cannot rely upon technology. But we're not here to focus on October 7th. We're here to talk about what's happening with Iran. So to introduce Miri, I'm going to ask our president of the Toronto region, Abe Lewinsky, and we'll turn the floor over to him.
Thanks, Lance. I too have been with Miri on many different missions, more so in hotel rooms or hotel breakfast areas, but many times. And what Lance said is 100% true. So let me tell you a little bit about Miri. She's a retired colonel. She's the incoming director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism and serves on the faculty of the Reichman University in Herzliya, where she teaches graduate and undergraduate students. Miri has a deep insight in the intelligence, security, and diplomacy worlds and is a renowned international public speaker. She is a frequent commentator on these issues in the world media. During her 20 years in the IDF, she served as the intelligence officer of a regional border brigade, as the intel officer of the Israeli Airborne Division, and as the assistant to the director of military intelligence. As a full colonel, she served as the deputy head of the Combat Intelligence Corps. In all her positions, she was always the first woman to serve in such a capacity. After retiring from the military, Miri served as the Israeli government spokesperson during the Second Lebanon War in 2006 and as the international press secretary to Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. After retiring from official duties, I can't believe you're retired, Miri, but it seems like just yesterday. Miri continues to serve on a numerous number of boards. She's a founding member of the Deborah Forum, Women in National Security, Cyberwell to combat online anti-Semitism, Alma, a research center in the Galil, and the Tope Center for Social Policy Studies in Israel. Miri is married to Gilad and the proud mother of 3 children. I know I said that you were retired, but with all those boards that you sit on, I'm amazed you have time to even be with us for an hour today. So without further ado, Miri Eisin.
I greatly appreciate that. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm going to keep my glasses on. You're going to allow me to do so that I can kind of look and see, even though I'll put it on, take it off as I do that there. Good evening, Shalom, Erev Tov. I'm sitting here in Ramat HaSharon, Thursday evening, and it's April 18th, and everybody wants me to talk about what will Israel do. But to be able to talk about what Israel may do or may not do, first thing and foremost, I would like every single one of you to break the mold that the media have been presenting the last week. I want you all to break the mold. The Israeli-Iranian confrontation did not start when Iran attacked Israel early Sunday morning. The Iranian-Israeli war did not start because Iran is trying to frame it as if it started April 1st with an attack against an Iranian facility in Damascus. Iran is trying to frame it that all that they were doing is a legitimate response to an Israeli illegitimate attack. And now all of the world is inside the Iranian framing. And as I said, break the mold. I don't want to accept the premise of the way this is being presented now. And I say that both inside Israel and around the world. Iran is a regime, and has been for many years, that supplies, ideologize, I love making up words, makes up the ideology, calls openly, day in, day out, for the destruction of the Zionist entity. I have a very nasty, very harsh sense of humor. It's probably the only way in Israel that we could get through just the last 6.5 months. But for a moment, think about it. Iran itself presents itself in the last week as the victim. Could there be anything more ridiculous? Iran is presenting itself as the one that was doing the legitimate self-defense to the illegitimate Israeli attack. And I, in the last 4 or 5 days, we're already Thursday, endlessly on international TV and getting that question that Iran was defending itself, was only responding to the illegal or just the Israeli attack. Break the mold. Iran's Islamic regime over the last 40 years and overwhelmingly over the last 20 years is the main establisher, destabilizer throughout the Middle East, and Iran threatens all of the countries in the Middle East. And when I say all, I include Lebanon with Hezbollah in it. I include Syria, not exactly a friend of ours, that Iran very much wants to use as a platform for itself, let alone a country that we admire more, perhaps, like Jordan or Saudi Arabia. I don't know if I admire, but I need to be clear. The events that I'm going to talk about, when we say the Israeli response, it's as if everything started on April 14th. No, break the mold. Iran has been directly involved in this war from October 7th. Iran has been directly involved in this war from October 7th in a variety of ways. I don't think that Hamas started the war because Iran told them to do so. And in that sense, you should know that there are people who think that as well. But there's no question that Iran supplies ideology, idea, weapons, training, and that in itself is something that mobilizes, that assists. You know that there's somebody who gives you better practices within that terror tactic world. Iran is the one that is supplying all of the weaponry to Hezbollah, to Shiites in Syria, to the different Shiite groups in Iraq, to the Houthis down in Yemen. And I'm not saying, and so Iran is responsible for everything in the world, but again, we're breaking the mold. Because Israel on Sunday, I say Sunday, I know that for you it was Saturday, but the physical attack arrived in Israel. It started Saturday night here, but physically it arrived in Israel on Sunday, April 14th. The whole event started late Saturday night, April 13th and April 14th. And this is a different stage in that war, but it didn't start on April 14th. And when I say a different stage, a sovereign country, to me, with a regime that is an authoritarian enemy regime, the regime of Iran is the one that should be vilified, isolated, the pariah state of the world. And Iran, in the last 6 months, has been one of the main enablers helping to turn Israel, not Iran, into one of the most, not one of the most, are we not the most vilified country in the world right now? After 6 months and more of the worst war that we've ever had. And I put that into the framing. Have I broken everybody's mold? Have we gotten out into that first step? I'm going to go in and say again that I'm going to talk about the future. And I'm not a prophetess. I do not know what Israel will do. But the first aspect is that it is not about responding to April 14th. It is about an ongoing campaign which needs to bring Israel a sense of security, meaning if I in Israel think that I'm going to be attacked again overtly in the way that Iran did overtly, because covertly they do all the time, but in the way they did overtly, openly on April 14th, then I need to preempt to stop that because it is threatening me. But it isn't about a response in retaliation to the Iranian attack. And I give that because Israel has been openly, again, in a war against Iran and the proxies. And that in the last 6 months from October 7, when October 7, everybody in that framing, again, it is all about Hamas, the horrific, brutalic, genocidal attack on October 7. What we didn't notice, it's under the radar, we're not focused, is that Hezbollah and all of the other Iranian proxies, Hezbollah from October 7th, all of the other Iranian proxies, the ones that sit, the Shiites both in Syria, Shiites in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and additional different places around, all of them have participated in attacking Israel, and they didn't start at the end of December because of a humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. They didn't start because of the Palestinian woes. No, no, no. They all started in and around the beginning of October, and more importantly, Hezbollah, which is the main, most trained, most active, most successful in terrorist terms. That's me being sarcastic again. Hezbollah, you know, the star student that may even surpass in its own way its backer, Iran, and its military terror capabilities. Hezbollah has been at war with Israel from October 7. So again, what you all want to know, what is Israel going to do? And I say, but Israel is not responding to April 14th. Israel is looking at the overall picture. This isn't about Israel not knowing what to do in the aftermath of the April 14th open direct Iranian attack. It's about looking at the broader picture of Iran and the proxies. How do you get a sense of security for Israel so that we feel safe? And how do you do that hand in hand with isolating Iran? And here we get into the crux of different possibilities of what Israel could do because there are contradictions within that. What do I mean? Israel is very disturbed and has been for many years that the international community do not view Iran as an existential threat. We in Israel have viewed the Islamic regime of Iran as an existential threat for many years. Existential even without the nuclear weapons, certainly if they would achieve nuclear weapons. Why do we see them as an existential threat? Because on Saturday night, they can fly into Israel, 300 projectiles, and they still have, it's a country of 90 million people. It's a country that has a very strong technology and industry and academic background. We have this idea, we say the mullahs in Iran. And so everybody thinks in that sense that we're talking about some kind of, and I'm very hesitant with the kind of words I'm using. They're not and I apologize if I'm dissing somebody else right now, but Iran is not a sub-Saharan country that is illiterate. It is a very literate country. It is a very advanced technological country. We understand that about North Korea, and for some reason we don't understand that about Iran. And I would say that Iran, Persian-speaking Iran, is way more advanced than a North Korea. And Iran is a large country, 90 million strong. And Iran, for the last 40-some years, has had an Islamic regime which has become a kind of prototype. Here, this is the way we rule in a country with an Islamic regime, when we have the supreme religious leader who defines geopolitics, who defines the rules of the day. And Iran, over 40-some years ago, defined in the month of Ramadan a day that was invented by the Islamic regime of Iran. It was invented by them, and it is called Quds Day. So I saw that you were writing before where you're from, and some of you are from Toronto, and some of you are from Vancouver. And hi to the people from Winnipeg that I love, and all over the place. I'm sure that there are lots of people that I know on this call. And I'm just saying that right now because go look up what you had in Canada in 2024 on Quds Day, which is the last Friday of the month of Ramadan, and you had it in every single one of these different places. And it is not part of the holy month of Ramadan. It is an Iranian Islamic regime anniversary that was defined by Khomeini. We all remember Khomeini. He was the first guy who did something, who did the revolution at the time, the Islamic Revolution. And it has been continued all of these years by Khamenei. But Quds Day, that was defined by Khomeini and continues with Khamenei, and it's the Islamic Revolution, is about destroying the Zionist cancerous tumor of the world. Hi, that's us. So I go back to what will Israeli response be? We are trying every single day to understand how you contend with a regime that calls Israel illegitimate, child killing, cancer tumor in the world. And you're looking at me and going, what is she talking about? Read the tweet from the Supreme Leader on April 3rd, Quds Day. That's when it worked out this year in the month of Ramadan, in which he called the Zionist regime the cancerous tumor of the world. That was this year, 2024. He says that every week. You say, so he's the religious leader, but that is the leader of Iran. Everybody quotes the president of Iran. The president of Iran is appointed by the leader. What matters in the Islamic regime of Iran, and has for the last 40 years, is the supreme leader. It was Khomeini. Now it is Khamenei. I'm not going to talk to you about, rights of people. This is an Islamic regime that lives its life according to the Quran. And I don't think I'm not Muslim. This isn't about my interpretation of the Quran. It's about the Iranian Islamic regime's interpretation. And as it has been over the last 40 years, is that Israel, also known as AKA the Zionist child-killing pariah regime, cancerous tumor of the world, that we need to be destroyed. They say it all the time. All right, so what will Israel's response be? And I say that because this has to do, again, not just with Iran. Iran and the Islamic regime, their power is both in technology. They have a lot of capabilities. They have developed technologies. They export them, as you all know, to Russia. Russia has used them extensively in the war against Ukraine. They're all together in that same boat. Isn't it nice when all of these, I'm being very sarcastic, wonderful regimes get together? And just think of how that is. So that in the aftermath of April 14th, it's not about punishing Iran. It's not about showing Israel can. It's about the general geopolitics of what you want to achieve. Do we want to make sure that Iran is isolated? How do you isolate Iran when Russia and China, I heard before also in that sense, the G7, but when Russia and China, that immediately means that the UN, as soon as you go to like Security Council or the UN, well, that goes down the drain. Russia and China some of the five veto members of the 5 veto members. And then you go into the G7, and that doesn't include all of the different ones in there. But when you look around, you go, so how do you isolate this regime? And to me, remember how I started? You got to break the mold. My biggest challenge right now is that we're all using the Iranian mold to describe this last week as if Iran was attacked, Iran retaliated, and now Israel's retaliating. No, no, no. Iran needs to be called out, isolated, and not by the president of the United States, but by a much broader aspect. And it means that any kind of company that works with Iran cannot be allowed just to get away with it with, airlines and selling them things. And again, I'm not against the Iranian Persian people, but the Islamic regime of Iran is the destabilizer throughout the Middle East. Why did we have a coalition? Okay, so Israel's response in that sense is it's our policy is not about the response. It's about our policy towards this threat. And this threat did not start on April 14th. What was different on April 14th? What do we need to take into account? For me as an Israeli, certainly somebody who comes from the security and the military, the biggest wow moment was not the interceptors. That was a pretty big one. It was the international cooperation against the incoming rockets. All of us have talked about it. Why do I say it's a wow moment? because it wasn't in words, it was in actions. Israel did not defend itself alone. Do you realize that that pretty much is the first time for Israel? Lots of times people send us weapons. Look at what's happening in the last 6 months with all of the modern democratic countries of the world saying they shouldn't send weapons to Israel, okay? Just think of how that's playing out in that sense inside our regional geopolitics. And on Saturday night, early Sunday morning, US, UK, France participated physically in the defense. The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, I don't know the details. Everything that I'm telling you is based on the exact same sources like you. But the Israeli Defense Forces, the chief of staff, all of them have said, thank you. And I want you to, now I want to give you some insight. Again, this is about what would we do next? Because to put together that kind of, everybody talks about the coalition. I want to take it down a step for a moment. The coalition, that's nice. Prime Minister calls president, president talks to chief of staff calls minister of defense. Those are the words. But for the militaries, there was military coordination. There was military cooperation that took place early April 14th. You do not build that after a phone call Saturday night at 10 p.m. and say, hi, we need some help. Can you send a few planes? The most complicated, challenging kind of cooperation, certainly in an active war zone, and sadly, I live right now in an active war zone, is to have together forces from different militaries, different languages, different cultures. Can I just put French, English, Arabic? Talk about different English and American English, okay? Because UK, American, Israeli, Hebrew, you just have 4 different languages, 4 different cultures, 5 different cultures, and military, you have to know, you have to train together. You have to talk about it before. This is about coordination. This is about cooperation. So I'm getting back to, so what will Israel do? We had that April 14th in the morning. That is part of that overall response of having a reliable, responsible type of coalition that continues against the Iranian threat. What's the challenge? The challenge, and I don't mean this in a mean way, I know I sound very rude sometimes, is that me and my rudeness as I come out of my house Thursday night. In my rudeness, I will say the following. I'm sitting right now next to Tel Aviv. You're sitting in Canada. And when the missiles, drones, because these are different types, it's cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones that are the type that we affectionately call the different types of UAVs suicide drones. And Hezbollah has been using them successfully against Israel, including in the last few days. Those same kind of ones that come out of the Iranian military industry and are being used on the state of Israel, inside the state of Israel, by Hezbollah from Lebanon into Israel, is that on Saturday night and Sunday morning, when those rockets are all incoming, they're aimed at me. So kol hakavod, kudos to us. I love the term. I think it's actually a terrible one, the 99% success. I'm very wary about terms like that. Wow. But what I see there is also the challenge for what you do next. Because you already brought together the coalition. This isn't about the future, it's about right now. That coalition is part of your defense system. And that coalition, whoever is a member of it right now, very much do not want Israel to do a high intensity response against Iran. It's like all the voices are there. And I'm going to tell you, I can understand their logic, not only their logic, but this is about I'm going to use my academic type terms in that sense, almost of a bipolar system, okay, which is basically the Iranians, the proxies, and I say sadly, Russia and China, because they've chosen a side, even Turkey to a certain degree, even though Turkey is in between, and these all impact us. And in that system, do you want to break the system? Do you want to do something where you're going to be the one that does something against your own coalition interests? So that's going to be one side of the table. We're about to be at Pesach. We're going to have 4, arba kushiot. In a moment, I'll do arba kushiot because there is no right answer. There are questions and lots of possibilities. And the other side of it says, if not now, do we just let Iran get away with it? what Iran has been getting away with for so many years. And here, and that's why I'm saying I don't know what we will do. Do we do something high intensity against Iran? That will have a price to pay. If we don't do something high intensity against Iran, listen to me carefully, that will have a price to pay. I just said the exact same thing. And those are the dilemmas that are on the decision-making table. It isn't just one or just the other. You have to do some kind of a balance. Now, in any kind of military response, as opposed to other types of responses that I'll talk about in a moment, in any kind of military response that is open and overt, you take an action, you don't know what the other actions are going to be. Let me remind you, Iran, over the last 20 years, not since April 14th, not since October 7th, over the last 20 years, has supplied and built Hezbollah, a Lebanese, Arabic-speaking terror organization that is both Lebanese, Arabic-speaking, and completely inspired, trained, and an ideology of the Islamic regime of Iran, meaning it's like this connecting point. Iran has made Hezbollah into a force that if Israel does something, then the whole idea of that force is to deter Israel from doing something directly against Iran. And I'm very wary of Iran coming out of this with win-win, that they built the Hezbollah force to deter us from doing anything against Iran, and that force will deter us from doing anything against Iran. Because if we do something against Iran, you know where it's going to come at us? From that Hezbollah force on the other side of the border. Here I want to add in that we've already been in a very active war against Hezbollah over the last 6 months. Hezbollah fired already on October 7th, participated in that sense once the Hamas attack started and they saw what was going on October 7th. They already started to fire mortars and short-range rockets into the north of Israel. From October 8th, I'm on April 18th, that's over 6 months later, Hezbollah has fired every type of projectile you can think of from Lebanon into Israel. Hezbollah has created inside Israel, not in Lebanon, a buffer zone. In this time period, Israel in the initial stages was only responding to Hezbollah fire. We were fighting very high intensity down south. But in the months that passed, Israel has said, why does Hezbollah define the rules of the game? How come they fire into Israel and Israel responds? Since one does a terror military army, non-state actor inside Lebanon, define the rules of the game. And Israel has been systematically from the end of December throughout the last few months, preempting and attacking Hezbollah capabilities inside Lebanon. And I give you that as part of what Israel is doing, because the same question goes for Iran. Iran supplies them. Iran uses all of these proxies so that nobody will touch Iran, but it is Iran. Remember, the Islamic regime were the cancerous tumor in the world, trying to show Israel as being the one that is the illegitimate one. And I say sadly that in this week, when Iran attacked Israel, they have managed to build that equation. And for us, Israel supporters, to be using their framing. Oh my God, do I talk a lot when I go off on my little things. What else did I want to talk about? Okay. The last portion that I kind of want to talk about a bit more in that sense, because I'm giving you ideas. Everybody's looking for the answer. I don't know what the answer is. We may respond in Iran, but if we do so, it'll hurt the coalition. If we don't do so in the Middle East, they'll notice that we didn't do so. We may respond more strongly against Hezbollah as a proxy. We have already been upping the game against them, taking the initiative, not allowing them to define the rules in the last few months. If we do it more, the response is going to be a very close quarters near one. And I don't know what the coalition will do with that. Again, remember, these are different elements because at the end, we want to isolate Iran. We may do nothing right now. But for the moment, I want to add in an additional aspect in which I fear that we're all focusing on the military response. We're all focusing on the hardware, high intensity response. And I want to open up an additional dimension. In the last 6 months from October 7th, and overwhelmingly from April 14th, I've already been conceptualizing this over the last 4 days for myself. I've been doing a lot of media interviews in this sense. I have seen in the last 6 months how the information warfare, the perception warfare, please don't ask me about hasbara. It's the word I hate the most in any lexicon, in any language. Information warfare has been around since the time of Julius Caesar. Information warfare has been around since Sun Tzu. Information warfare was not invented by Nazi propaganda, but again, everybody in that sense has used it. But in the last 6 months, we have seen exceedingly successful Hamas information warfare and Iranian information warfare. And I say that because in that field, we fail. And when I say that we fail, whatever response we do right now, whatever we decide to do right now, everybody is looking at it through the framing of Iran. So if we do it, we're vilified because why did you respond? Everybody said not to. If we don't do it in the greater Middle East, we're ridiculed. I don't remember how I say that correctly. We're ridiculed, I think is the way that you say that, by look, Israel is all about threats. Now in Israel, on April 14th and in the aftermath, I ignore, this is about perception and information versus military. You may have noticed it's an election year in the United States. You may have noticed that there's a lot of undercurrents in the Israeli domestic scene. That would be Miri, again, being slightly sarcastic. So I want to separate between the rhetoric of politicians. I'm not an elected official. I have never run for office. I never will, but I've never run for office. And I say that because I have enormous respect for anybody who's willing to stand for office. That's their prerogative. But I'm saying that because there's a difference between rhetoric, words, I can say whatever I want, and between actions. And coming out and quoting to me what one minister or a different minister said in the last 4 days, to me is irrelevant. What matters is the decisions that the security cabinet decide. The rhetoric is part of a different platform, that information perception warfare. Part of the rhetoric is for domestic consumption. Part of the rhetoric is to try and define the rules of the game. But I'm saying that right now because right now you can come at me and say, this minister said, destroy Iran. And that minister said, destroy Iran. And that's rhetoric. That's fine. Everybody can say whatever they want. But my big but is when officials, not politicians, when the chief of staff, okay, says that Israel will respond, a threat like that has to be followed through. Has to be followed through. Because in deterrence, when a military figure, again, not the elected official, and that's different because at the end we have elected officials and they say things. And go and read. The prime minister has been very careful in what he's been saying this week, more so than I felt in the last 6 months of war. The defense minister was very careful in what he said this week. The chief of staff said things, but if you threaten in the Middle East, you have to follow through. And I've been following the statements themselves because the bottom line of what I'm saying is that I absolutely think because I heard Israeli officials threaten that we will take some kind of physical action. I do not know what that physical action will be. If we do not take physical action after we threatened, it will be detrimental to our Middle Eastern deterrence capability. And everything that I said is Miri's assessment. I am not inside the room. I sat inside the room in other years. I understand how decisions are made. I'm not inside this decision room. And I will add in that throughout the last 6 months, I have been exceedingly critical of the Israeli Security Cabinet decision room because I feel and fear that it totally lacks diversity. And I think that you do not make good decisions in a room that is I'm sorry, all men on test. I have a lot of ways to put it in that sense. There are a lot of ways to look at security, and security is not about who is the highest ranking general and did a position. Security that you're looking at a country, at its strength, at its sense of security. What Lance was mentioning before, our resilience, our capability to be able to withstand, those are all things that are part of our security, and we need to know all of those things. And as I said, so I've been very critical about that. Okay, I think that at this stage along the way, wow, don't I run off on the month when my mouth when I want to say a lot of things? Is there anything else that I didn't talk to about right now? I pretty much went through all of those different things. The last, but not, it's not a question of good or bad. We're 6 months into a war. This war is not like any other. The war did not start again on April 14th. Iran was behind there the whole time, not as the hovering, pulling all the strings, but in giving the information. They were the main engine that amplified from October 7th in the evening the Hamas narrative messaging that has so brought that enormous gap between the way that we view the war of Israel against Hamas. They were the engine. They amplified it physically. This is using their enormous cyber capabilities to amplify that out. That doesn't have to come from within just the Hamas or Palestinian arena. Those are two different things. It was overwhelmingly amplified by the Iranian cyber machines. And in this war, Israel is in a multi-front war. And part of that multi-front war is that Iran is behind most of the fronts in a very full way. So that the Israeli initiative, not response, but the way that we build our policy towards that Islamic regime is both with April 14th, but with all of the additional aspects of what's come up. And that includes the continuation of what Israel is trying to achieve against the military terror army of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, that it isn't disconnected. I have to look at it all. And so last and so not least, for us in Israel, this war at its core heart is still in its absolute traumatic bleeding stage because there are still 136 hostages inside the Gaza Strip. And it doesn't matter to me, dead, alive, some of them have to be alive. And we need to understand that that's going to, again, in the response, you have to take that into account as well. At this stage, Lance, I haven't read any of the chat, but I've seen that there's chat on the screen, and I'm assuming that there are a few questions.
Absolutely. Perfect timing. So we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So at this point, I'm going to invite JNF Canada's Executive Director for the Pacific region, Mike Sachs. He's going to moderate the questions that have been emailed in. Some went to him privately, some went to the group chat, and he's going to curate a few questions that to present to you. And without further ado, Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Lance. Miri, I don't know, it's difficult to say that I enjoyed your insight. I felt that it was a very tachlis, very Israeli. So there have been a few questions that come in, and I'm going to start with my own because I feel that I get that luxury right now. So, Miri, what do you think is the logic of Iran for launching their attack from their own soil, thus opening the door for a legitimate strike, possibly of the nuclear program, within their territory? This is something that Israel has long been rumored to want to do.
So I'm going to give you it in a different framing. You framed it one way, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And in that frame, it's as if, why would Iran want to do this when they understand that one of the possibilities, okay, is that Israel will respond against the nuclear capabilities. And this is a case of policies, ideologies, and understanding of regional geopolitics. I think that Iran thinks right now that Israel, we were at a really low point on October 7th. I think that we were even at a lower point in April of 2024. That they view us as weak, that they view it as something that they could do, that they view their situation right now as being way better than Israel's, meaning that the entire world is going to tell Israel not to respond. Okay, I'm giving you their view. It's that flip side. We think of it and within that world, there's been a lot of discussions inside Israel. And one of the biggest challenges always is, how do you step into the shoes of the adversary so that you can assess what they're going to do? And I give you the dilemma that you have all of the time, because Israel has been striking against Iranian Persian speaking targets for years covertly, allegedly, as we like to say. Not since October 7th, in the last decade, in Syria, in Iraq, allegedly on Iranian territory, in Lebanon. When I say against Iranian Persian speaking, that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. To make it clear, I like to think of them as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are the French officers of the French Foreign Legion, okay? They go to the different places and then they work with the local proxies. And in this war from October 7th, the top generals that allegedly Israel killed on April 1st were not the only top Iranian Persian-speaking Revolutionary Guard generals that were killed since the beginning of this war, allegedly by Israel. So again, in that circling of why did they respond this time, to me it means, again, that's my understanding, that they thought that we're so weak. And not only that, but the information warfare that they have been using from April 14th, the tweet, I kind of want to bring it up and read it to you for a moment, but the tweet that the Iranian ambassador at the United Nations Permanent Mission put out, April 14th at 01:06, meaning it was when the rockets were in the air, when the drones were flying towards Israel. He put out a tweet that said, Iran's legitimate response is under Article 51 of the United Nations General Assembly, something, something. I'm not a lawyer. And it is about Iran's right for self-defense against the illegitimate attack done by Israel April 1st. And I say that because, again, in that framing of what you said, they think that we are weak, that the world is against us. The United Nations certainly has a majority that is totally against us. If it wasn't for the United States, I'm not saying the US and the UK, the UK and France, if it wasn't for the United States, I don't know what would happen inside the Security Council. And again, that's my assessment of how they view the situation. And right now, look at it. The entire world is telling Israel not to do anything. Now, I want to add into your question because I feel that it's important. I've heard it from a lot of people. I want to do this as a positive, not as a double negative. I'm going to do it as a negative, and then I'm going to try and make it. I think that Iran thought that they would do damage in Israel. They did not fire them, because it's going to be another question otherwise. They did not fire 300 projectiles to be intercepted and stopped 99%. They did not do so. That is not the Iranian thinking. They thought that they were going to do damage in Israel. And all of those who say, yeah, they did it because they could do it. No. That's not the Iranian thinking at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, that definitely puts it in perspective when you think about it. Now, I do remember you saying during your talk that, you hate the word Hasbara. But, one of the questions that came in, which I actually think is a very good question, and we want the Miri understanding versus just, whatever the official Israeli response. When will Israel take a long-term approach to PR and do what the Arabs and Palestinians and Iranians have been doing for over 10 years, and get the narrative back? Like when will
we change who Israelis are?
So pretty much never.
Michael, don't you know, Mike, we know everything. We know because think of the framing. The Israeli framing is that we're right and they're wrong. And if we just explain it better, i.e. the word Hasbara, then everybody will get it. And I'm like, you said that. And by the way, it isn't about PR. It's much deeper in that sense about that, because it's very much within the media, information warfare. It's a whole different arena. We'll do a different session about that a different day. As I said, it's the one that we do very poorly, mainly because we look at it as Israelis. We think we're right. We do not look at it from the other perspectives. And that's part of it's a real challenge. I don't have a good answer on that one. I have a different approach, but I'm not going to start talking about that here.
No, and I think people like you being able to speak and speak to groups like what we have today is a step in that direction, but it's swimming
I'll give
upstream.
one little example. Okay, just one little example.
You can give us a big one too if you want.
It's okay. It's a big example. I'm just belittling it for a moment, right? Okay. Conflicts in the world, conflicts, not just the Israeli-Palestinian, conflicts in the world are viewed through two different types of lenses. There are those who look at them through what I'm going to call a security lens or security language, and that goes together with the whole terminology of looking at the threat and at the response and at the weapons. It looks at it zoom out in geopolitics and it's very big and it's very in its own way kind of zoom out. That doesn't make it right, wrong, good, or bad. And a different way of looking at conflict, which overwhelmingly exists in a lot of the Western world, more than in other portions of the world right now, is what I'm going to call the humanitarian lens or the humanitarian approach, which looks at the conflict through the victims.
Yeah.
If I just said that right now and you understood what I was saying, when you talk security to somebody who talks humanitarian, at the best you sound officious, and at the worst you sound like you are a monster who does not care about human life. And when you talk humanitarian to somebody who talks security, at the best you sound like you have really good intentions, and at the worst you sound like you're 30,000 feet above earth and have no idea what's in the real world. Everybody in the audience right now is nodding. Learn to be bilingual. Listen to the different languages. Israel only knows how to talk security. What I just said to you right now is overwhelmingly because, A, we talk security, and it goes together with the whole terminology that you inadvertently, with the words that you're using to describe, I'm not even going to say explain, to describe a situation, you make it worse with somebody who's talking humanitarian.
Mm-hmm.
And I give that as an idea. It's one that I work at extensively. It is easier said than done, but understanding that and listening to that, just think of all the conversations you have. This isn't about you and me. I did MSNBC before, okay? So MSNBC is what you would call a relatively progressive US news channel as opposed to different ones. So think of the difference in framing also in that sense between Fox or between MSNBC, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. And I'm just giving those as examples, and you can do that on your own media. But this isn't about the media. This is about the conversations that you have with your friends and hearing that sort of thing. Because when you blame the other side and you're talking security to, I blame Hamas, what people hear is that I just blame the Palestinians and I'm blaming the victim. Could you be more cruel? When you do that, and I could go on in that sense, but it's a whole way of looking at it. I'll stop.
Well, and I think I speak for the other 143 people on here that all of a sudden started looking back at conversations I've been having, and like you said, now starting to try to look at it in two different lenses. Now, in Canada, we've had there was cheering when they were announcing in the rallies on the streets about the Iranian attack. We have large Canadian Iranian community here, very vocal. And it seems also that the majority of Iranians also do not support the government. Is there a plan amongst Israel and the allies to, well, I mean, as much as you know, since even though you're not in the room, to drive this regime change through disgruntled Iranian citizens from within, maybe?
So the one thing that most of the administrations around the world, democratic administrations, have learned in the last 30 years, and I could even say 40 years, and I'm even going to go to 50 years, is that there has been no successful outside regime change. So when we talk about that, okay, you have had regime change that's come from within, meaning it's not from exiles per se. You could say that the last one in that sense is that the Islamic revolution in Iran was outside because Khomeini was sitting in Paris and came back, but that was very much a local that brought in an outer figure, but it came from the bulk of citizens there. I am very wary, and I want to hope that most people will be very wary of outside intervention in domestic issues in any country. I'm not there to define for them if they will be a democracy or not a democracy. I also want to say something even more provocative. When God gave us the 10 Commandments, it doesn't have democracy written on them. There are a lot of different ways to look at the world and at the running of the world, and democracy is a choice, and it's not the only choice. And I'm going to say something more provocative. It's not the only moral choice. It's the only moral choice in the eyes of those who think that a liberal democracy is the only way. And I push back on that one, because one of the aspects that's happening throughout certainly countries that have Muslim majorities is that they're building a different type of civil society. None of them are democracies, and I don't expect any of them to be a Western liberal democracy. And I say that up front because that's part of the expectations when you say regime change, is that what we want is a democracy. And that's not what you're going to get.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Now, I'm skipping a couple of questions because there's definitely one here that was asked that I actually was thinking myself. If you were in the room with your experience, what specifically would your advice be to those in that war cabinet right now?
Wow. So first of all, I'm really, really glad I'm not in the room. I think that 2024 only has bad choices. I'm not saying that 2023 was a great year here, okay? But 2024, 6 months into this war, the open, as I said, the overt direct war between Iran, which is a direct continuation of years of the covert war, mean that right now you have to balance between a triangle of issues that I don't know what is more important. We have to get the hostages back, because otherwise this country's heart will break and will never be mended. And it doesn't matter, by the way, dead or alive, got to get, okay, it's like that's part of our moral fiber of this country. We have to physically act in some way to allow people, hundreds of thousands of people, to live in their homes and feel safe. That's both down south, everybody knows about that, and it's also up north where 70,000 people have been evacuated, and Canada has connections, JNF, absolutely. And into all of that, Israel does not want to be the isolated pariah of the world. So you need to be strong. You need to have deterrence. You need to get back the hostages. To get back the hostages, no good choices. To be able to get the people to go back to their homes, it's like there's only these military options. If you do it in diplomacy, then you're allowing, there are no good options. And so what I would say to all of us is that, to me, the worst is to not make a choice. There are no good choices, so choose the least bad one. That's what I want to say. I am worried that we're not choosing. And when you don't choose, you're actually making a choice, just not one that was on your table. But things are going to happen. So that my advice would be, sit down with your bad choices, breathe in deep, and choose the least bad choice. How's that for a happy, almost Pesach bracha?
We're definitely not going to end on that question. So we have time for one more, and there's tons of questions that have come in, which is phenomenal. I mean, you definitely hit a nerve with a lot of people. But there's one that I think also is very important for us as Canadians. Is pretty much everyone here is from Canada. Like I said, we have a large Iranian community. Iran's physical threat, right, we saw was directed at Israel. But it's known that there are, IRGC leaders and members in Canada, they say upwards of 700 or more. Do you see through your lens that the threat is just to Israel, or is it to Jewish communities outside as well?
But that's not the way I want to end. But I'm going to say that I absolutely think that the threat of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and their proxies, Hezbollah, has Hezbollah people in Central America, South America. Hamas has people in North America. I'm just saying in that sense, we've been focused on Iran and Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And when I said information warfare and Israel's failure, that's one way of looking at it. But to me, the last 6 months are the ones in which I sadly, as an adult, am seeing a change as a Jew. And I think that we all need to be right now that the battlefield is not April 14th in Israel. Sadly, the battlefield is a Jewish battlefield worldwide. At the institute that I now have the honor of being the director of, ICT at Reichman University, and I stepped into the position on October 8th, no less. At the institute, we are now changing some of our focus, jihadi terror, Palestinian terror, Islamic terror, we're all on those ones. And we're focusing now on a new term that we're calling terror and anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. And that's not something which is focused in Israel. We're talking worldwide. And sadly, I see that as being a very sad aspect, direct result of this war. I want to end with something positive, can I?
Of course, please.
The only thing, not the only thing, we're 141 people on this call. Oh my God, that's our strength. But I want to say something very clear. You're worried about what Iran will do to us. I'm worried about what terrorism and anti-Semitism is going to do to Jewish communities worldwide and to you. The trauma that we're living here because of October 7 is one that's local. The trauma that I felt, I was in the States a few weeks ago, that I felt in North America with the outburst of anti-Semitism, you're in trauma. You're in a different place. And I want us to acknowledge that right now. That don't view this right now, it's about Iran and Iran against Israel. The last 6 months have brought out something where our trauma, we need to acknowledge that this is something in that sense of what goes on. And I say it as a strength, not a weakness, that we're way better when we work together, when we understand together, when we look at challenges together. As I said, at the Institute now, I'm trying to open up and we're building a whole new thing because we always had a far-right terrorism desk. But the far-right, far-left, anti-Semitism meets terror is a whole new aspect for us. It's not Iranian Revolutionary Guards. It's something deeper and very scary. So I don't think that right now, I don't know if the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are about to have things attack in Western countries. I want to tell you all that part of that aspect of coalition, cooperation, working together is not just in intercepting Iranian incoming projectiles, it's worldwide in understanding in the intelligence world and in the security world, the kind of terror threats that exist if it's in Canada or anywhere else in the world. And that's part of that aspect where you want cooperation and a coalition in an open line. On Monday night, I will be hosting 28 people at my Seder. I want to tell you that because it's Pesach, and at Pesach, we did it to Pharaoh. We're going to get through this one, okay? We have the most amazing heritage. We've gotten through the worst of times. We're going to get through this one as well. And the way that we do it is that we know that Monday, no matter what your time zone, wherever, we're all going to be doing that same Seder, that same Haggadah. Read the Kushiot, read the 4 questions, and ask questions about it. This is the year to be asking questions.
I think that's
Chag Sameach to everybody.
I think that's a great place to end. Miri, on behalf of JNF Canada and everyone here who got to listen to you, thank you for being a voice. Thank you for speaking up and for taking the time with us today. Chag Sameach, Chag Pesach Sameach, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you in Israel whenever any of us are there. And to everyone else on the call, thank you so much for being with us today. And Chag Sameach.
Chag